नमस्कार दिव्य सज्जनों। एशिया के सबसे बड़े साहित्य उत्सव उन्मेष के इस विशेष सत्र में हम सभी प्रतिभागी वक्ताओं का और आज के इस सत्र के माननीय अध्यक्ष महोदय का हार्दिक स्वागत करते हैं, अभिनंदन करते हैं। जैसा कि आप सबको विदित है, साहित्य की तमाम विधाओं के साथ साथ साहित्य के अनुशासन से वाबस्ता अन्य रचनात्मक विधाओं को भी हमने अपने विमर्श के केंद्र में रखा है। और ये सत्र, जैसा कि आप सब जानते हैं, अनुवाद की विधा पर केंद्रित हैं। और हमें इस बात की हार्दिक खुशी है कि इस सत्र में अपनी प्रतिभागिता दर्ज करने के लिए हमारे समय के सबसे वरेण्य और सक्रिय अनुवादकों को, साहित्यकारों को हमने बतौर प्रतिभागी आमंत्रित किया है। हम आपकी उपस्थिति का मान करते हैं, आप सबका हार्दिक अभिनंदन करते हैं। आज की इस सत्र की अध्यक्षता के लिए हमने आमंत्रित किया है आदरणीय श्री एन कल्याण रमन जी को। हम चाहेंगे कि करतुल्ध्वनि के बीच आइए, हम उन्हें पुकारें इस मंच पर। आदरणीय श्री एन कल्याण रमन जी बतौर वक्ता आमंत्रित हैं मंच पर क्रमशः श्री आलोक गुप्त। आलोक जी वरिष्ठ अनुवादक हैं और उनकी रचनात्मक सक्रियता से हम सब भली तरह वाकिफ हैं। उनका इस मंच पर अभिनंदन, स्वागत। आदरणीय श्री जी प्रसाद जी से निवेदन है कि वे भी आएँ और मंच पर अपना आसन ग्रहण करें। इस क्रम में आमंत्रित हैं श्री सहाना विजय कुमार। सहाना विजय जी हमारे बीच में हैं। मोहतरमा, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत, अभिनंदन। आसन ग्रहण करिए। त्रिनंजन चक्रवर्ती जी, आपका भी बहुत बहुत स्वागत, अभिनंदन। और श्री वैभव शर्मा जी। वैभव हमारे सबसे छोटे प्रतिभागी हैं, लेकिन लघुता में प्रभुता को साधने की क़ुव्वत जो होती है वो उनके पास है। बहुत बहुत स्वागत, अभिनंदन आपका। हम हमारे आज मंच पर उपस्थित माननीय अध्यक्ष और अन्य प्रतिभागी अनुवादकों के स्वागत के लिए बहुत ही सम्मान के साथ आमंत्रित करना चाहेंगे साहित्य अकादमी के 72 सदस्य, साहित्य अकादमी पुरस्कार से अलंकृत हम सब के अत्यंत वरेण्य, हम सब के अत्यंत आदरणीय श्री रघुवीर चौधरी जी को। रघुवीर जी, आपका स्वागत है और आपसे गुजारिश है कि मंच पर उपस्थित हमारे आज इस अनुवाद के सत्र के सभी प्रतिभागियों को अंगवस्त्र ओढ़ाकर उनका अभिनंदन करें। सबसे पहले माननीय अध्यक्ष महोदय का, आदरणीय श्री एन कल्याण रमन जी। श्री आलोक गुप्त और क्रमशः मंच पर उपस्थित जी प्रसाद, आदरणीय सहाना विजय कुमार, त्रिनंजन चक्रवर्ती और वैभव शर्मा। यह हम सबका सौभाग्य है कि आज के इस अनुवाद के सत्र में आदरणीय रघुवीर चौधरी जी उपस्थित हैं। गुजरात के परिसर से चलकर समूचे भारतीय साहित्य के परिसर में उनकी उपस्थिति को हम अनेक तरह से लक्ष्य करते रहे हैं। यह हम सबका सौभाग्य है कि आदरणीय रघुवीर चौधरी जी एशिया के सबसे बड़े इस साहित्य उत्सव उन्मेष में अपनी उपस्थिति हम सबको गौरवान्वित कर रहे हैं। और अनुवाद का ये सत्र, जो कि विशेष रूप से उन्मेष के सावृत्ति में हमने परिकल्पित किया है, उस सत्र में आदरणीय रघुवीर चौधरी जी का होना निश्चित रूप से हमारे लिए एक सौभाग्य का विषय है। और मंच पर उपस्थित हमारे सभी प्रतिभागी वक्ता, बहुत बहुत आभार आदरणीय रघुवीर चौधरी जी। मंच पर उपस्थित हमारे तमाम वक्ताओं का हम औपचारिक परिचय देना चाहेंगे। यूँ तो आप सब उनकी रचनात्मक आहटों से भली तरह वाबस्ता हैं। आप सब जो साहित्य के प्रेमी हैं, आप सब जो रचनाकार हैं, आप सब जो सर्जक हैं, आप सब जानते हैं कि जो परस्परता का, आवाजाही का जो एक परिवेश निर्मित हुआ है पिछले दिनों, उसमें निश्चित रूप से ये सुविधा हम सबको मिली है कि हम सब एक दूसरे की खुशबुओं से बहुत गहरे तक वाबस्ता हों। और इस दृष्टि से ये तमाम अनुवादक, ये तमाम रचनाकार जो मंच पर हैं, शायद अपनी रचनात्मकता के साथ में अपनी प्रत्यक्ष उपस्थिति के साथ भी आप तक पहुँचे हों। लेकिन औपचारिक रूप से हम बताना चाहेंगे कि आज के इस समारोह की अध्यक्षता के लिए उपस्थित आदरणीय श्री एन कल्याण रमन जी। हमारी आज की इस सत्र की अध्यक्षता के लिए उपस्थित आदरणीय श्री एन कल्याण रमन जी यूँ तो तमिल कथा साहित्य से जुड़े हैं और उस साहित्य का अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद करने का एक लंबा तजुर्बा उनके पास है। लगभग 2.5 दशकों के अपने महत्वपूर्ण इस कार्यकाल में 23 तमिल कृतियों का आपने अनुवाद किया है। पेरुमल मुरुगन की पुनाची के अनुवाद के लिए आपका नाम 2019 में जेसीबी पुरस्कार के लिए भी सूचीबद्ध किया गया था। आपको बताते हैं कि 2020 में अमेरिका में नेशनल बुक फाउंडेशन अवार्ड के लिए भी आपका नामांकन हुआ। इस तरह से एक अत्यंत वरिष्ठ और अनुभवी अध्यक्ष आज हमारे इस अनुवाद सत्र में उपस्थित हैं, उनका हम हार्दिक स्वागत करते हैं। आदरणीय श्री आलू गुप्त जी प्रख्यात कवि हैं, आलोचक हैं, अनुवादक हैं। इस तरह से कई सारी विधाओं में उनकी आवाजाही बनी हुई है। आपकी कई सारी कविताएं विभिन्न प्रतिष्ठित साहित्यिक पत्र पत्रिकाओं में लगातार प्रकाशित होती रही हैं और 30 वर्षों से आप लगातार गुजराती से हिंदी में समीक्षा और परस्पर अनुवाद का काम कर रहे हैं। आपकी 5 आलोचना पुस्तकें, गुजराती से हिंदी में अनुवाद की 8 पुस्तकें और हिंदी से गुजराती में अनुवाद की 5 पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हो चुकी हैं। आपको बता दें कि रामविलास शर्मा आलोचना सम्मान और साहित्य गौरव पुरस्कार सहित कई सम्मानों और उपाधियों से आपको अलंकृत किया जा चुका है। आदरणीय श्री जी प्रसाद जी जवाहरलाल नेहरू विश्वविद्यालय में अंग्रेजी के पूर्व प्रोफेसर रहे हैं और एक अनुवादक के रूप में और एक कवि के रूप में उनकी उपस्थिति को हम कई सारी कृतियों में और उनकी रचनाओं में लक्ष्य करते रहे हैं। आपको बता दें कि आपका पहला कविता संग्रह इन दिल्ली विदाउट वीज़ा 1996 में प्रकाशित हुआ, जिसकी की समीक्षकों और पाठकों के बीच में अपार प्रशंसा और उनको इस कृति के लिए अपार प्रतिसाद मिला। आपको विशेष रूप से हम इस तथ्य से अवगत कराना चाहेंगे कि अंबई की कहानियों का अनुवाद अ रेड नेक्स्ट ग्रीन वर्ल्ड 2021 और उनकी कविताओं का दूसरा संग्रह दिस वर्ल्ड ऑफ माइन 2021 में प्रकाशित हुआ। आपका बहुत बहुत अभिनंदन, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत। आदरणीय सहाना विजय कुमार हमारे बीच उपस्थित हैं, उनका भी स्वागत है। और सहाना जी कन्नड़ में लिखती हैं। पारिवारिक मूल्यों के समकालीन विषय पर आधारित उनका पहला उपन्यास क्षमा 2016 में प्रकाशित हुआ था और उनके उपन्यास काशीर को व्यापक रूप से प्रशंसा प्राप्त हुई और यह हिंदी, अंग्रेजी और मराठी में भी प्रकाशित हो चुका है। आदरणीय निरंजन चक्रवर्ती जी अलायंस फ्रांसिस कोलकाता में 3 दशकों से अधिक समय से फ्रेंच पढ़ा रहे हैं और आपने कविता और गद्य की कई पुस्तकों, कालेजयी तथा फ्रांसीसी साहित्य की समकालीन शैली दोनों का बांग्ला में अनुवाद किया है। आपको 2022 में रोमन रोलैंड पुरस्कार से सम्मानित किया जा चुका है। आप नियमित रूप से देश और आनंद बाजार पत्रिका में फ्रांसीसी साहित्य, समाज और राजनीति पर लिखते रहे हैं। आपका भी बहुत बहुत अभिनंदन, बहुत बहुत स्वागत। और सबसे कम आयु के प्रतिभागी आदरणीय वैभव शर्मा जी, आपका भी बहुत बहुत स्वागत, अभिनंदन। आपको बता दें कि वैभव शर्मा संपादक, कवि और अनुवादक के रूप में हमारे आज के इस समकालीन परिदृश्य में बहुत ही सितारे के रूप में शाया हैं। आप NCW इमर्जिंग ट्रांसलेटर मेंटरशिप प्रोग्राम के तहत 2023 के हिंदी अनुवाद सदस्य के रूप में भी शामिल किए गए। इस कार्यक्रम का मार्गदर्शन अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बुकर पुरस्कार विजेता अनुवादक जी रॉकवेल ने किया था। आपकी अनुदित रचनाएं आउट ऑफ प्रिंट, वर्ड्स विदाउट बॉर्डर्स में प्रकाशित हुई हैं और हिमाल जैसी पत्रिकाओं में भी आप प्रकाशित होते रहे हैं। तो देवियों सज्जनों, ये हमारे आज के प्रतिभागी वक्ताओं का, प्रतिभागियों का परिचय था। लेकिन जहाँ तक हम अनुवाद की बात करें तो एक शेर याद आता है कि खुशबुओं को फैलने का शौक़ है मगर, खुशबुओं को फैलने का शौक़ है मगर मुमकिन नहीं हवाओं से रिश्ता किए बगैर। तो ये जो अनुवाद है, इस अनुवाद की इस पूरी पंख पर अपने पांव पसार कर, अपने दामन को पसार कर भाषाएं भी आवाजाही का काम करती हैं। अनुवाद की एक लंबी परंपरा हम देखते हैं तो ये पाते हैं कि हमारी वाचिक परंपरा जो शताब्दियों से चलकर हमारे पास आ रही है, वाचिक परंपरा भी हमारे इस अनुवाद से अछूती नहीं रही है। कबीर के न जाने कितने सैकड़ों हजारों पद जो कबीर ने अपनी तरह से अपनी सदुखड़ी भाषा में लिखे थे। लेकिन आज अगर हम मालवा के जनपद को देखें, छत्तीसगढ़ के सुदूर अंचलों में देखें तो सैकड़ों हजारों की तादाद में हमें कबीर के गायक मिलते हैं जो कि कबीर से लिखी गई इतर भाषा में गाए जाते हैं। अगर बात करें हम भारतीय साहित्य को मिले पहले नोबेल पुरस्कार की, तो हम याद कर सकते हैं रविन्द्रनाथ टैगोर का गीतांजलि, जो उन्होंने लिखा तो बांग्ला में था, लेकिन जब अंग्रेजी में वो अनुवादित हुआ तो विश्व मंच पर वो प्रतिष्ठित हुआ और उसे नोबेल पुरस्कार मिला। और हाल ही की बात करें तो रेत समाधि आप सबसे अछूता नहीं है। इस तरह से न केवल साहित्य बल्कि दीगर इलाकों में भी अनुवाद की अहमियत को बहुत शिद्दत से आज महसूस किया जाता रहा है। बहुत सारे क्षेत्र हैं ज्ञान के, विज्ञान के, और विज्ञान की बात करें तो विज्ञान में भी न जाने कितने सारे विषय ऐसे हैं जिनको आज बहुत ठीक ढंग से अन्य भाषाओं में खोले जाने की दरकार है। इन्हीं तमाम पक्षों पर बात करने के लिए हमारे आज तमाम विभिन्न विषयों के ज्ञाता अनुवादक हमारे बीच उपस्थित हैं। मैं अब ये सूत्र माननीय अध्यक्ष श्री एन कल्याण रमन को सौंपना चाहता हूँ। वे आएँ और अपनी तरह से आज के इस संवाद का संचालन करें। आइए एक बार फिर कल्प ध्वनि से हम इस अनुवाद सत्र का अभिवादन करें।
Welcome all of you, and thank you for being here for this session on translation as a driver for progress and critical thinking. That's the topic given to us, and we will try to do justice to it over the next hour and a half. First, I must thank Sahitya Academy for constituting a panel which consists entirely of translators. This is my first experience of translators getting to talk about the potential impact of their work. Usually other people also join, but I'm very glad to be chairing a panel that consists exclusively of translators or those who are engaged in translation. Okay, now as far as translation as driver of progress and cultural thinking is concerned, I would first like to prepare the ground with some conceptual clarity on these terms, because very often, progress, you could be talking about one thing and people can understand something else. So I would like to define what progress is to me, okay, and a view that is shared by people across the world, millions across the world, I might say, and that is, progress is a movement towards a more just and humane society, and a more and humane world, a world in which everyone born into it is assured of good health, education, and a life of freedom and dignity. A world where all the life forms in it and the natural environment which supports their existence are assured of a continued existence, continued survival into the future. Obviously, I'm defining progress from a feeling of crisis that has beset the current world, the world at present, and I believe that any so-called progress which doesn't address these crises and tries to resolve them is no progress at all. Now, one of the reasons why we need to think critically about the world at present is that the world at present is the outcome of is a consequence of the way the structures of power in the world have operated so far, and also the common sense or the popular wisdom that represents the logic of dominance of these forces. So in general, there is no way of challenging the way these power structures operate as a matter of course, because they have the free run to operate the way they like. And the only province in which they can be suitably challenged, apart from politics and the world of policy making and all, is art. And we are going to talk about the potential impact of art and translation in particular in, in bringing about this critical thinking and change. Okay. Basically, critical thinking involves dissenting against these structures of power and the popular wisdom that support these structures of power. Because unless we understand what is wrong with the world, how we got here, how we got into a climate crisis, for instance. I mean, that is only one example. We are never going to make progress, and therefore, critical thinking is absolutely necessary, not only to figure out how we got here, but also to figure out how we are going to get out of these crises. So that, according to me, is critical thinking, and we'll talk about how literary translation can help. Now, the title says translation in particular. So translation can be of anything. It can be of literary text as well as non-literary text, which is, it could be Marx, it could be anybody else. It could be social science, it could be philosophy, it could be any branches of knowledge. Now, I'm not going into that because I'm a literary translator myself. And the way these ideas diffuse through translation is fairly well known. They diffuse normally through institutions, whether political institutions or educational institutions or through government or whatever. They normally do that. So whatever I say about literature will also apply to them, but I can't talk in detail about how they diffuse and how they affect this critical thinking. But one thing that we have to bear in mind is that translation has always been central to human development. From the spread of religions to the reform of religions to building of empires, including colonial empires, and decolonization, translation has played a major role. So I'm not going to talk about the transfer of non-literary knowledge through translation, because literature is something very special, and we'll see how special it is, and we'll talk about what literary translation can do to promote such critical thinking. And another thing is that translation by itself cannot do anything. What does translation do actually? It replicates or it reproduces the text written in one language, arising from one language community, to one or more languages, and one or more makes them available to one or more language communities. So this by itself cannot drive critical thinking and change, and even if it does only on the strength of the qualities of the original text, right? So we need to differentiate between translation and literature, and we have to sort of understand that what we have to look at primarily is the way literature operates, at least the literature of dissent operates, and how translation is translation adds to it by making the same text available in different contexts, in different, and there are certain benefits to be obtained from it, and that we will look at near the end. Now, obviously, literature, the function of literature, according to Susan Sontag, because I prefer her definition because it's very concise and very precise by my lights. It is to extend our sympathies, to educate the heart and mind, to create inwardness, or to make you capable of introspection, as it were, and to secure and deepen the awareness with all its consequences that other people who are different from us really do exist. Okay? There is no other realm of experience which brings it home as powerfully as literature. So this is what literature does in uh, in general. Now, what I want to talk about is the particular traits of literature which are conducive to critical thinking. One is that literature doesn't differentiate between various classes of people, you know, because it consists of telling stories, and you can tell stories about any human being, or any human being can tell their own stories, right, or any group. So there is accommodation and space for everyone on an equal footing, something that is not available in the real world. Okay, so this is something that we need to understand. The second is that it unearths fresh truths from familiar realities. Okay, we can have we can take something to be the truth. Okay, we can take the truth of war, for instance. But we seldom talk about, you know, the people who go to war, people who lose lives, who are maimed. I mean, these never enter the narratives of war, okay, except in literature. And therefore, we need, you know, I mean, there can be, you know, there can be, the people who lose their lives can be portrayed as martyrs, and the people who, you know, get bombed out of their lives, I mean, they can be represented as the vanquished, but the sheer human cost of war is never enters the discourse, except in, you know, in all its complexity, except in literature. So it unearths fresh truths from a familiar reality and highlights realities that are excluded or trivialized by popular wisdom. You know, in popular wisdom, I mean, the powerful set the narrative, and anything that does not fall within that ambit, within the ambit of that narrative, is simply ignored or excluded. So this is again something that literature has space for such representations. And yeah, and the third most important thing is literature being an art, being an art form, is basically not programmatic. You know, it doesn't have a set agenda. Nobody writes a story to a set agenda. What it tries to do is to imaginatively recreate human experience or human realities, so that, you know, something may be learned from it. Okay, so that it can be experienced by the reader, and the reader can disclose whatever meaning that they choose from their reading, right? So in that sense, it presents a complex reality as it is, and it works through evocation of realities and empathy. It demands empathy from the reader in order that whatever it tries to portray is grasped and then, you know, and then acted upon, hopefully. So the last thing is that it leaves scope for the reader's imagination. It is not like a presentation of saying that this is the reality and you must accept it, that kind of thing. A story, or, you know, a piece of fiction, or even poetry is capable or is amenable to plural readings, and that it is the reader's imagination which gives life to a text. Okay, so these are the qualities of a literary text which we translators work with, and we are very aware of it. And translations are produced out of this awareness. So we should be about that. Now, many of these texts which promote critical thinking have been translated and they've been widely read. And I would like to just give some examples of these texts, which sort of, which subject certain dominant ideas to scrutiny. Okay, first is nationalism, for instance. You know, wars were fought between nation states, you know, for a long time, and particularly in the modern era, starting from World War I onwards, we've had an endless series of wars where nations go to war with other nation states. What does it really mean that a nation goes to war? Okay, and of course there is nationalism which says that the nation is above everything else, and therefore it is important, and yours is not a question, and so on. Now, by depicting the suffering and the unspeakable tragedies that people on the ground undergo through war, the attitude, the popular attitude towards wars and nationalism has shifted quite a bit over the past 100 years. And we start with the English war poets, Sigrid Sassoon and Wilfred Owen and so on. I mean, they were the first people to really openly speak out against war and to speak of suffering, even though England won the war, or is part of the alliance that won the war. This sat on their consciousness for the rest of the time. I think even now the Martyrs' Day or something is celebrated in the UK. Now, later on, I've come across women poets from Tamil Elam writing about the devastation caused by the war of liberation, in the sense that the freedom fighters or the LTTE were fighting for a nation that they didn't yet have, and still they managed to wreck the population, the Tamil population of Sri Lanka. So, I mean, was this the only way to resolve that crisis? Is a question that comes up, obviously. So again, nationalism doesn't look very good. Now, there is also Alexander Hemon, who is a Bosnian writer I would like to talk, whom I've been reading a lot. He's a Bosnian American, and he was in Sarajevo when it was attacked, first by the Serbian generals who invaded Sarajevo, and then by the NATO forces which tried to drive out the Serbs. Now, the thing is that internationally, it was seen as a conflict between the Serbs, what's his name, Milosevic, and a mad general, and NATO, which is trying to sort of save them from the clutches of this dictator. But what really happened to the people of Sarajevo, and Alexander Hammond's work, actually, it gives a legitimacy and a value to the people of Sarajevo, as much legitimacy and value to the people of Sarajevo, if not more, than the Serbian invaders, as well as the protectors from NATO. So that is, so this tradition of, war literature or anti-war literature, as it were, it goes on, and nationalism has become one of the, what can I say, durable ideas of this age, and not such a good one, actually. But as far as ordinary people are concerned, but this is something literature will continue to exercise its critical faculties on this idea for time to come. And I also want to mention the poetry of Aga Shahid Ali, who celebrates his own land, and quite obviously he describes the land under siege, and the country without a post office, and this at least makes the current situation morally ambiguous. Okay, so there is space in literature to do that, without being dismissed, without being sort of thrown out, or being punished for it. Now, we take partition, for instance, which is one of the grave experiences that the subcontinent experienced. Of course, at the horrors of partition, it consisted of violence perpetrated from both sides, you know, and so on. But the but there is an entire corpus of partition literature which is about the irreducible humanity of the people who suffered and who were displaced, and the people who lost their lives, people who were raped, and who became paupers overnight, and who try to make a living in a distant land with nothing but hope. Now, the entire literature of partition is an argument because the partition is done and whatever it is over with. None of us were alive during partition. Most of us weren't anyway. So what do we do now? I mean, do we continue the pathology of partition with vindictiveness and thoughts of revenge and so on, or do we act in a more conciliatory and healing way towards what partition wrought and the people who are living out the aftermath of the partition, because the effects of partition have been intergenerational, so they are continuing even to this day. So this is something, again, partition literature poses in a way that it's very difficult to pose outside. And those books, your Sadat Hasan Manto, who's been translated even into Tamil and in many other Indian languages of late, and Yashpal's Juta Sach, which is a masterpiece and has been translated as This Is Not That Dawn. These are works that will endure and which will keep us thinking about whether we are doing whether we are handling partition the right way. So it is again part of the critical thinking that literature seeks to induce. Now you have patriarchy, for instance. Again, it is part of the conventional or popular wisdom that men have certain rights that women don't have, and so on. Now, literature, I mean, there's a whole host of feminist literature which has come now, over the past 40, 50 years in India as well as across the world, where women are given, a place and an agency which is not available to them in the real world, or their struggle to earn a place and their struggle to realize their agency or act with agency is depicted. And therefore, it sits on everybody's consciousness. And obviously women are winning victories over it. And there is also the fact that more and more stories of subaltern women, women who don't belong to the urban class, and Dalit women, for instance, more and more such stories are being told. And everywhere this dominant idea of patriarchy is being examined. It's examined through real life narratives, it's examined through imagined narratives, but it's something, again, it is a question of literature taking up cudgels against dominant ideas. The last one I'm going to talk about is the genre of Dalit literature. Again, a whole host of Dalit memoirs have been written, and initially at least they were presented as stories of victims, people who have been victimized by history, victimized by their immediate society and so on. But there have also been narratives which present Dalits as, without discounting the material reality. They have also presented Dalits the fullness of their humanity. That they can laugh, they can cry, they can celebrate. This is again something we don't get anywhere else except in narrative fiction. So these are the ways in which literature, by presenting realities which make us question the dominant ideas, by representing the powerless as full human beings, and giving them space and agency, we induce critical thinking about the power structures and the way the world is. And there is eco-criticism also, fiction also, but I will talk about it at the end of the. Now, translation is, now we talked about literature and we talk about translation a little bit. Translation is the circulatory system of the world's literature, and it is essential to human development, as we've already seen. By translating texts of dissent, it is possible to create solidarities among, if you read all the Dalit literature across Indian languages, then it is possible for them to recognize, similarities in the way they are treated and similarities in their condition, and it is possible for them to forge a solidarity across and wage whatever struggle they want to wage. And translation also across languages, it sort of makes people understand each other, and therefore promoting this understanding hopefully will lead to tolerance and accommodation rather than ideas, adversarial ideas based on entrenched narratives, and in very many cases a steady diet of misinformation. So this is something that literature can do. Finally, the availability of these texts by itself is not enough to drive critical thinking and therefore progress. As I said before, it depends on the imagination of the reader, how these texts are received and how they are acted upon. So that is really what I have to say about translation as a driver for progress and critical thinking. We have a bunch of translators here, experienced, and we'll hear their reflections now. Thank you.
धन्यवाद आदरणीय एन कल्याण रमन जी। बहुत सारी ऐसी बातें थी जो बहुत तकनीकी स्तर पर भी और रचनात्मक स्तर पर भी अनुवाद के दायरे में हमें देखना सोचना बहुत ज़रूरी है। उन तमाम पहलुओं का खुलासा किया आदरणीय एन कल्याण रमन जी ने। 4 बजे हमें इस सत्र को संपन्न करना है, क्योंकि अगला सत्र फिर इसी सभागार में मुकर्रर है, सुनिश्चित है। लिहाजा हमारे पास अब 5 वक्ता हैं और ये 5 वक्ताओं के बीच में लगभग हमें 45 मिनट का वक्त गुजारना है। तो हम ये आत्मनियंत्रण रखें, आत्मसंयम के साथ कि बहुत सूत्रों में अपनी बात हम कह सकें। जी जी या प्लीज या या प्लीज प्लीज you please come.
Now I invite Mr. Alok Gupta to speak.
Thank you. Thank you.
धन्यवाद अध्यक्ष महोदय और साथी वक्ता और सामने बैठे हुए सभी विद्वज्जन, और विशेष मुझे आनंद है मेरे गुरु रघुवीर चौधरी, जिनके चरणों में बैठकर मैंने अनुवाद और गुजराती भी सीखी, वो आज सभागार में मौजूद हैं। मैं आदरणीय अध्यक्ष महोदय ने लिटरेचर का सारा परिप्रेक्ष्य स्पष्ट कर दिया, अनुवाद के बारे में भी थोड़ी बात की। मैं अनुवाद पर ही केंद्रित रहूँगा। अकादमी का और का बहुत बहुत आभारी हूँ कि ये मंच मुझे उपलब्ध किया। अनुवाद के बारे में तमाम नकारात्मक अवधारणाओं, मान्यताओं, अनुवादक की सीमा वगैरह के बावजूद भी अनुवाद आज उतना ही और उससे अधिक लोकप्रिय है। ये अनुवाद की एक बहुत बड़ी विशेषता है। आज इंटरनेट की सुविधा, सूचना का विस्फोट, इसने वैश्विक परिदृश्य को जानने में के लिए सुगम बना दिया है, लेकिन विकल्पों की बहुतायत ने सही चुनाव के लिए अतिरिक्त सजगता की भी आकांक्षा की है, बात की है। चर्चा के लिए अनुवाद को रखना अकादमी की दूरदृष्टि का, और विशेष रूप से इस तरह से अनुवाद पर हमेशा सेशन होते रहे, लेकिन क्रिएटिव थिंकिंग और प्रोग्रेस, इसको कैसे अनुवाद डिफाइन करेगा, ये एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती है, लेकिन मैंने कोशिश की है। मैं साहित्य का विद्यार्थी हूँ, तो साहित्यिक अनुवाद और विशेष रूप से उसके ही उदाहरणों से कुछ बात करूँगा। क्योंकि मेरा हिंदी और गुजराती में काम है, तो मैं हिंदी साहित्य के कुछ उदाहरण से ये बताऊँगा कि किस तरह से ये चीज़ें संभव हुई हैं। भारत बहुभाषी देश की अपने अनुवाद की अपनी समृद्ध परंपरा रही है, लेकिन औपनिवेशिक भारत में एक नए समाज, संस्कृति और भाषा से हुई मुठभेड़ ने भारतीय मनीषा को एक नए ढंग से सोचने के लिए विवश किया था। भारत में मॉडर्निटी की प्रक्रिया और मध्य वर्ग के उदय ने सांस्कृतिक आदान प्रदान को गति दी। अंग्रेज ओरिएंटलिस्ट विलियम जोन्स ने 1784 में एशियन सोसाइटी की स्थापना की। उनके अतिरिक्त चार्ल्स विल्किंस ने भगवत गीता और हितोपदेश, हेनरी टॉमस कॉल ब्रुक्स ने भारत के दार्शनिक ग्रंथों का संस्कृत से सीधा अनुवाद किया। इन प्राच्यविदों ने भारत की मिथकीय, धार्मिक और दार्शनिक प्राचीन परंपरा और भारतीय आचार विचार के खुलेपन को स्वीकारा। विलियम जोन्स ने 1785 में कालिदास के अभिज्ञान शाकुंतल का अनुवाद किया। इसके शीघ्र कई संस्करण प्रकाशित हुए और अंग्रेजी से जर्मनी में जॉर्ज फास्टर ने 1791 में इसका अनुवाद किया और उसके बाद यूरोप में इसकी धूम मच गई। उन्होंने इसके बारे में जो रिएक्ट किया था वो आप सब परिचित हैं, उसको मैं छोड़ रहा हूँ। 19वीं सदी के प्रमुख भारतीय साहित्यकारों ने अपने समाज को शिक्षित करने के लिए संस्कृत और भारतीय साहित्य के अतिरिक्त अंग्रेजी के महत्वपूर्ण ग्रंथों का अनुवाद किया। रचनाकारों ने इन अनुवादों के केंद्र में मूल्य निष्ठा और नैतिकता को विशेष बल दिया। मात्र एक उदाहरण, भारतेंद्र जी ने मर्चेंट ऑफ वेनिस का दुर्लभ बंधु नाम से भावानुवाद किया था 1880 में। नवजागरण के दौर में आधुनिकता के उन्मेष अनुवाद कार्य का निहितार्थ था। आचार्य महावीर प्रसाद द्विवेदी ने फ्रांसिस बेकन, जॉन स्टुअर्ट मिल और हर्बर्ट स्पेंसर जैसे अंग्रेज चिंतकों के ग्रंथों का हिंदी में अनुवाद किया। उन्होंने अपने समय, परिवेश, देश की स्थिति और समस्याओं का सजग निरीक्षण किया और देश हित से संबंधित भाव विचारों के अनुकूल रचनाओं को चुना और उनका अनुवाद किया। मात्र इसमें से एक उदाहरण जो उन्होंने ऑन लिबर्टी का अनुवाद किया था, उसकी पंक्ति किस तरह से देते हैं। उदाहरण के लिए, जिस समाज में, जिस लोक समुदाय में इस तरह की स्वाधीनता का आदर नहीं है, वह समाज स्वाधीन नहीं कहा जा सकता। फिर वहाँ की राज व्यवस्था चाहे जैसी हो, कोई देश, कोई समाज या कोई जन समुदाय जिसमें इस तरह की स्वाधीनता पूरे दौर पर और बिना किसी प्रतिबंध या रोक टोक के नहीं दी जाती, वह सब प्रकार से स्वाधीन नहीं माना जा सकता। इसी तरह आचार्य रामचंद्र शुक्ल ने बेकन का हैकल का द रिडल्स ऑफ यूनिवर्स का अनुवाद किया विश्व प्रपंच के नाम से, और उसकी एक लंबी भूमिका दी। उस लंबी भूमिका में उन्होंने डार्विन से लेके जितने इस तरह के विज्ञानी थे, उनके रिसर्च को आधार बनाकर भारतीय संदर्भ में कुछ टिप्पणी की। उसमें से भी एक उदाहरण मैं देना चाहूँगा। विकासवाद की व्याख्या के अनुसार धर्म कोई अलौकिक, नित्य और स्वतंत्र पदार्थ नहीं है। समाज के आश्रय से ही उसका क्रमशः विकास हुआ है। धर्म का कोई ऐसा सामान्य लक्षण नहीं बताया जा सकता जो सर्वत्र और सर्वकाल में मनुष्य जाति की जब से उत्पत्ति हुई है तब से अब तक बराबर मान्य रहा हो। समाज की ज्यों-ज्यों वृद्धि होती गई त्यों-त्यों धर्म की भावना में भी देश कालानुसार फेरफार होता गया। कोई समय था जब एक कुल दूसरे कुल की स्त्रियों को चुराना या लड़कर छीनना अच्छा समझता था। देवताओं की वेदियों पर नर बलि देने में किसी के रोंगटे खड़े नहीं होते थे। बाइबल में भी इसके कई उल्लेख हैं। शुनहशेब की वैदिक गाथा भी एक उदाहरण है। हम देखते हैं कि किस तरह से उन्होंने एक और उदाहरण दिया कि किस तरह से प्रेम और सहानुभूति बंदर मनुष्य को ज़्यादा मिलती है, इसलिए उनमें ये गुण विशेष रूप से पाए जाते हैं। पालन पोषण को भी उन्होंने महत्व दिया। आचार्य शुक्ल के साहित्य चिंतन में आधुनिकता और परंपरा का मुखरित द्वंद्व पाश्चात्य काव्यशास्त्र के संसर्ग का परिणाम है। उन्होंने कई पश्चिमी आलोचकों को खारिज किया और कुछ को अपनाया, जिसमें मूल्य सिद्धांत जो आई.ए. रिचर्ड्स का है उसका उन्होंने महत्व बताया। 19वीं सदी के चौथे पांचवें दशक में भारतीय भाषाओं में मॉडर्निज्म पर बहस तेज हो गई थी। न्यू क्रिटिसिज्म के टूल्स आलोचना के क्षेत्र में प्रयोग होने लगे थे। टी.एस. इलियट के काव्य सिद्धांत, इम्पर्सनल थ्योरी ऑफ पोइट्री, ऑब्जेक्टिव कोरिलेटिव ट्रेडिशन एंड इंडिविजुअल टैलेंट के निहितार्थ की चर्चा प्रमुख भारतीय भाषाओं में थी। कविता व्यक्तिगत की अभिव्यक्ति नहीं, व्यक्तित्व से पलायन है। भोक्ता और कवि में जितना अंतर होगा, कविता उतनी ही उत्तम। और सृजनात्मक क्षण के महत्व के बारे में उन्होंने बात की। अज्ञे जी, हिंदी में अज्ञे जी ने उसका विशेष रूप से उल्लेख किया और उन्होंने कई उनके भावानुवाद किए। उस बहस का विश्लेषण करना मेरा उद्देश्य नहीं है, लेकिन इस वाद विवाद से 2 दशकों तक हिंदी में आधुनिकतावादी और मार्क्सवाद के पक्षधरों के बीच समीक्षा के क्षेत्र में तलवारें खिंची रहीं। इसका सकारात्मक परिणाम यह आया कि हिंदी आलोचना अधिक चिंतनपरक और रचना केंद्रित हुई। हम जानते हैं कि तुलनात्मक साहित्य की धुरी अनुवाद है। 3-4 भाषाओं का विशेषज्ञ भी प्रत्येक पर समान अधिकार नहीं रख पाया था। आदरणीय अध्यक्ष महोदय ने अभी कई बात की, पार्टीशन की बात की। मैंने थोड़ा अध्ययन किया, उसके संदर्भ में मैं बात करना चाहूँगा थोड़ी। मैं भारत विभाजन के कथा साहित्य पर कार्य कर रहा था, तो हिंदी में यशपाल राही मासूम रजा के उपन्यास, मोहन राकेश की कहानियाँ, भीष्म साहनी का तमस उपन्यास, उर्दू में मंटो और राजेंद्र सिंह बेदी के कथा साहित्य के साथ जब पंजाब के साहित्य पर नज़र गई तो अंग्रेजी में खुशवंत सिंह का ट्रेन टू पाकिस्तान और अमृता प्रीतम के पिंजर उपन्यास को पढ़ा। अमृता प्रीतम का यह उपन्यास पंजाबी में 1850 में प्रकाशित हुआ था। मैंने पंजाबी के मित्रों से इसके बारे में तत्कालिक टिप्पणियों की बात की, के बारे में जानकारी चाहिए, लेकिन कोई बताया कि लगभग कोई ज़्यादा चर्चा उस पर नहीं हुई है। जबकि ट्रेन टू पाकिस्तान अंग्रेजी में लिखा गया था, उस पर बहुत सा समीक्षाएं भी और शोध लेख भी प्रकाशित हुए। बाद में वह फिल्म भी बनी। पिंजर पंजाबी का यह पहला उपन्यास था जो विभाजन की त्रासदी के सिर्फ 3 वर्ष बाद प्रकाशित हुआ था, लेकिन पंजाबी में 1 दशक तक इस पर कोई विशेष चर्चा नहीं हुई। इस पर विशेष चर्चा तब हुई जबकि 2003 में इस पर फिल्म बनी पिंजर, और उसके बाद 2009 में हिंदी का अनुवाद प्रकाशित हुआ। बाद में खुशवंत सिंह ने स्वयं इसका अंग्रेजी अनुवाद भी किया। मुद्दा यह है कि अब देखिए कि तुलनात्मक आधार पर अमृता प्रीतम का जो महत्व है, अगर आज हम लोग फिर से ट्रेन टू पाकिस्तान और पिंजर का विश्लेषण करें तो कई हमें अलग चीज़ें सामने आएगी किसका किस तरह का कंसर्न है। मैं विशेष रूप से एक और मुद्दा रखना चाहता हूँ कि जिसने हमें ये मंच दिया है, साहित्य अकादमी ने भारतीय साहित्य पर जितना कार्य किया है उतना शायद किसी संस्था ने इतना कार्य नहीं किया। और उसके प्रदान को पर भी कभी कोई गोष्ठी होनी चाहिए जिसके तभी हम उसको समझेंगे। ज़्यादा चर्चा इसमें नहीं करूँगा सिर्फ क्योंकि ये मंच उन्हीं का है, लेकिन मेकर्स ऑफ इंडियन लिटरेचर, भारतीय साहित्य के निर्माता, सीरीज संस्कृत, प्राकृत, लोक साहित्य और भारतीय भाषाओं के बड़े रचनाकारों पर उसी भाषा के विषय विशेषज्ञ द्वारा मोनोग्राफ लिखवाना और उसे उस भाषा के अतिरिक्त अंग्रेजी और हिंदी में प्रकाशित करना आलोचनात्मक विचार और विवेक को समृद्ध करने में अकादमी का विशेष योगदान है। अभिनव गुप्त, श्री अरविंद, प्रेमचंद, तिरुवल्लुर, रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर, फकीर मोहन सेनापति, श्री नारायण गुरु, विश्व सखाराम खांडेकर, ये लिस्ट, बुद्धदेव बसु जैसे 300 से अधिक भारतीय साहित्यकारों के मोनोग्राफ भारतीय पाठकों के लिए तैयार करवाए, ये बहुत बड़ा योगदान है। दूसरे देश, समाज, सोच, संस्कार और संस्कृत के परिप्रेक्ष्य में स्वयं को भी संस्कारित करने की संभावनाएं बढ़ जाती हैं जब हम अनुवाद के बारे में सोचते हैं। यदि आत्मरति और आत्ममुग्धता न हो तो अपनी उपलब्धि और इंग्लिशतानी, सिर पर लाल टोपी रूसी, फिर भी दिल है हिंदुस्तानी, ये विवेक जागृत रहे। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Mr. Alok Gupta. I'm glad to discover that there were many commonalities in our presentation. Now I'll ask Sahana Vijay Kumar to make present.
Namaskara. I'd like to thank Sahitya Academy for this opportunity, and let me clarify that I'm not a translator. I don't have first-hand experiences, but I'm amazed at the way ideas are transformed. So I'll be discussing a few influences that India has had on other countries and what we've borrowed. So I'll begin with an example which will explain how powerful translation can be. The year was 1909, and the librarian of Mysuru Oriental Library was Rudrapatna Shama Shastri. A Brahmin from Tanjore, Tamil Brahmin, comes over to him and hands him over Sanskrit manuscript. And Shama Shastri first doesn't know what to do with it. Of course, there are millions still lying unattended. And then when he deciphers it, he realizes that it is Artha Shastra. It's the priceless treatise on statecraft, which some of the scholars had been claiming that it existed, but we had no evidence. And we all know what happened afterwards. Everybody jumped in, they tried to compare it to Machiavelli, etc. And now, for those interested, R.P. Kangle has done an excellent work on analyzing. It comes in 3 volumes. It's a must-read. It's very discouraging that such works are not even prescribed to college folks also, I guess, because I come from a different background. I'm an engineer, basically. But that's a revelation. So this is how far ideas have traveled. And I'm very much amazed by the influence that Indian ideas have been having, the influence they have been having. So I'll just read through some of these ideas, some of these examples. Ideas rule the world is a maxim that always holds true. Ideas make or break societies, propel them forward, or cause regression. Now let's discuss some of these, how they were instrumental in enhancing the critical thinking abilities of man. Ages ago, when inspiring ideas evolved in man's mind, he probably deemed it important to spread them around. Thus, the ideas of a clan or country, though they seemed local when conceived, must have had a universal appeal when spread. In other words, translated. I think that's how translation began. It was not verbal. When it began, probably it was through storytelling. We all know that. What was the influencer from an Indian perspective was the ideas of spirituality, the mystical experience of union with God, the cosmic order, and the impermanence of self, etc. So these were derived from the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. So how did they influence? They have been rendered from the original Sanskrit into English and European languages. One important person who is controversial, but who has, towards the end of his life, made some very interesting comments about these influences is Max Muller in his anthology of lectures, India, What Can It Teach Us? He has a collection of 6 essays. I'll just quote a few lines. I shall not attempt to prove that Sanskrit literature is as good as Greek literature. Why should we always compare? A study of Greek literature has its own purpose, and a study of Sanskrit literature has its own purpose. But what I feel convinced of and hope to convince you of is that Sanskrit literature, if studied only in a right spirit, is full of human interests, full of lessons which even Greek could never teach us, a subject worthy to occupy the leisure and more than the leisure of every Indian civil servant. Now, he was addressing the British candidates for the Indian civil service in the late 19th century. So this was one example. There are more examples of Indian influence. The German philosopher Schopenhauer is familiar to everyone. He used to keep a copy of the Latin Upanishad by his side. And his very famous comment is, in the whole world, there is no study so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life. It will be the solace of my death. It's interesting to note that the Latin version came from Persian, and it was the brother of Aurangzeb, Dara Shukho, who first translated from Sanskrit to Persian, and then it went to Latin. And he titled them The Greatest Mystery or The Greatest Secret. And the poet T.S. Eliot was greatly influenced by Upanishads and has used Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in the section What the Thunder Said in his famous poem The Waste Land. Similarly, a wide range of physicists from Erwin Schrödinger to Nikola Tesla were fascinated by the ideas of Hindu Dharma. Very recently, there's a movie still going on, Robert Oppenheimer. So there's a very famous quote of his from Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This was after he performed the famous Trinity test. And epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata have shaped Indian thinking and behavior since antiquity. And post their translation from Sanskrit into English, German, and other languages, they have spread the essence of philosophy and the Indian way of life. Now, there is a very important point here, because the truthful character of Indians was very much respected or acknowledged by everyone. And Max Muller also says this in his anthology. When you read the atrocities committed by the Mohammedan conquerors of India from that time to the time when England stepped in, and whatever may be said by her envious critics made, at all events, the broad principles of a common humanity respected once more in India, the wonder to my mind is how any nation could have survived such an inferno without being turned into devils themselves. So they attribute this characteristic of Indians to the Vedas, to the Upanishads, to the Bhagavad Gitas, the learnings we first imbibed and then we spread it over by translating. And the doctrines of Buddhism, Jainism, and other religious sects have also had their impression. And as much as ideas traveled from within, we had foreign thoughts coming in the form of Bible, in the form of Quran, and the fact that they were also used as a tool for converting millions of people should not be overlooked. And the works like Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, translated from Persian into English, became very popular. D.B. Gundappa, the Kannada literary giant, has rendered these into Kannada. And the other great contributor of ideas was ancient Greece. We know these philosophers, Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. They also introduced their ideas, serious thinking, through translation. There are a few examples, but I'll not go into them because in the interest of time. The category of novels also leveraged translation and underwent a change in the form of narrative techniques. French novels of Victor Hugo, Russian novels of Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Solzhenitsyn have created new waves of thought and experience regarding warring emotions in human minds and hearts. Now, what happened when the Russian works were available to us is they opened up the window for the rest of the world to look into and understand them from the emotive perspective of the author. The vivid description of the social and the political situations, the turmoils and the conflicts, ethical conflicts as well, depicted through strong characterization in some of these novels, have had a lasting psychological impact on us, and also they have made us realize how these societies react. We didn't even know there was so much repression going on until they showed it to us in the form of novels. And non-fictional works are also not lagging. There are many examples. I'll just give out the example of Mustafa Kemal of Ataturk, Turkey, who was also called Ataturk, or the father of Turks. This was in 1923. He tried to modernize Turkey. There was a population exchange between Greece and Turkey. He did so many things that we are still unable to completely comprehend. And there are wonderful works on his life, and those after translation have become available to us. And he is, his life is an illuminating chapter for any country wishing to learn about progressing against odds. And at home, India has benefited from her own ideas. Ekam sat vipraha bahudha vadanti. We know that the truth is one and its manifestations are many. This was an Indian idea which helped her progress in spite of her complex, diverse setup. We've already discussed the epics. And there are some great works by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra, Sharad Chandra Chatterjee, etc. And Indian vernaculars have been able to mutually influence because of similarity in expression and nuance. In Kannada literature, I'd just like to quote a few names. Shivaram Karanta, K.V. Puttappa, Masti Venkatesh Iyengar, and many other stalwarts are rendered into regional languages. And as we speak, right now we have with us the acclaimed Kannada novelist Dr. S.L. Bhairappa. He's a pan-Indian writer and his novels have reached the multitude in various vernaculars. His diction has a universal appeal and he continues to inspire generations of readers with rare insights into Indian culture and philosophy. His magnum opus Parva is translated into Russian and Chinese languages. So, lost in translation is a popular proverbial saying. So, when it comes to Bhairappa sir's works, we all feel sorry for others because so much is lost in translation. Only we Kannadigas can cherish it in the original. But we have to, overall, we have to deeply appreciate mankind for having gained so much despite having lost, because we have made progress not only in literature, in history, philosophy, medicine, etc. Thank you, if I have overshot.
Thank you, Sahana, for that illuminating talk on how ideas travel from India to abroad and then reached India from abroad. Now I will ask Professor G. Devi Prasad to make his short presentation.
I'm carrying this just for show. Yes. I'll take the least amount of time because I want to listen to the others as well. And I know that I listen to myself far too much. Very quickly, but just a few points, reiterating really. Kalyan Ramanji started off with a very clear exposition of the theme. Very quickly that, yes, what is progress? We don't know what progress is. We don't know whether progressing. So changes, but progress, I'm not too sure. Driver, does anything drive anything at all? I'm not too sure of that either. Maybe the Tesla car, somebody else is driving from somewhere else, for all I know. We not even agree on what translation means. And of course, we will never accede critical thinking to anybody else. Only we have it. So that's to take care of the topic. Having said that, very quick point about translation, because we've been talking about literary translation. And I'm a pretender. I mean, I'm a new literary translator in that sense. We have people who've translated so much here, and they know so much more about it, about the very act of translation, and somebody who's thought about it. So very quickly, it's one point about translation. For me, translation is everything. That in the beginning was the word was in translation, right? Because to communicate, to begin to communicate is to begin to name, name objects, and when you name objects, you're translating the world. You're translating the world. So the world comes to you in translation, full stop. Does it lead to progress? I don't know, maybe silence is best of all, but, but if it leads to progress, all right, so be it. That's conversation of some kind. I'll accept that, perhaps, right? So it's, as I said, it's not philosophy point, simply, it's a statement of fact that the world is in translation. We are always translating. All utterance is translation. All utterance is translation. And if all utterance is translation, if we accept that, then there is iteration, there's reiteration. There's writing, there's rewriting. So that's how the whole process goes on. And whether, again, it leads to progress, in a sense, let's say changes, let's say establishment. We know modern Indian languages came into being in terms of, or established themselves, showed that they were worthy languages in translation of the epics. Right, and once you translated the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, you're equal to Sanskrit. So that is it. And so a lot of modern Indian languages come into being that. And of course, during colonial times, other translations, I'm not going there. Right, so we talked about the sense of nation, where does that come from, etc. Once Ananthamurthy said, India is, what is India? He says, India is Ramayana, Mahabharata. And so when I asked him if they don't have Ramayana, Mahabharata there, then the people who don't have are not Indians. They're not Indians. So you get a very limited definition. So we need to take the conversation forward. The conversation can be taken forward only through translation. Right. So let's accept that. We are in Sahitya Academy conference, and translation is an important part of Sahitya Academy's work, and it's a way of making conversation, making us all feel Indians, modern. I'm not talking about cultural, I'm not talking about civilizational. I'm saying as modern subjects of the modern Indian state, citizens of this country, the only way we can appreciate each other's point of view, the only way we can talk to understand each other is through translation. If we don't have that, let's forget being a modern Indian state at all. It's not going to happen. We're just going to be fighting each other all the time. Right, and as we are. The conversation is not happening. We need more translation. Right, so that's the second point, that as a modern, in fact, I must tell you this, something I discovered as part of a committee where we discovered, because I didn't even think about it. All of you will know it immediately. The Constitution of India is not available in all Indian languages in the Schedule 8B. Forget the other languages we have. It's not there, So if you don't have the Constitution of India available in Indian languages, then what is our citizenship? What is the country? What have we made in all these years? Right? Forget the law. That the law may not be available in all languages. Nothing is available in all languages. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'm not yet talking about literary translation. And in terms of progress, most of us will think progress in science, no? So again, science, what translation have we done? If we talk about education mother tongues, where are the texts? And when there are texts, when 3 books were released in Bhopal last year, in medicine, everybody jumped on those texts saying, ye nahi hai, wo nahi hai. But the point is, just 2-3 textbooks don't a subject make. You need so much around you. All the other reference texts, everything to be available in the language. Not done, even though it began in the 19th century with individual initiatives. All of us know about the translation societies, the book societies, textbook societies. We know about all the individual initiatives, including laudable ones, where they tried to incorporate other Indian thinking, ancient Indian thinking, into modern science. Right? Talking about Bhaskara and talking about algebra. So in that sense, that was all happening, but it all ended. It all ended very quickly, and we have not progressed yet. So in terms of, finally, I'm really keeping it short. Literary translation, when I said about conversations, literary translations enable us to have conversations. So conversations happen when expressive writing from different parts of the country are available to everybody in their language. The shame in this country is we can't translate from one Indian language into another. It doesn't happen, right? So rarely does it happen. Can you get somebody to translate directly from Tamil to Gujarati to Marathi to it can happen one language or other, but it doesn't happen really. To Hindi, shamefully, even Tamil, Malayalam has stopped happening. So it's a sad situation we are in. We need to educate ourselves in more languages and create the atmosphere for encouraging more and more translation. And then perhaps we can think about useful changes, whether we talk about progress or not, and then we can talk about India, that is Bharat, in translation in the Constitution of India itself. India, that is Bharat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Now I'll invite Thiranjan Chakrabarti to say speak.
You know, I am not very comfortable in speaking extempore, so I prepared some kind of write-up and I will read it. So first I thank Sahitya Academy for giving me this opportunity to talk before such an enlightened audience, and with the permission of President and our co-speakers, I am starting my talk. I can still remember the day in the early 1980s. I was watching a program on national integration on television, a burning issue of the 1980s. While giving a news bite on this, the renowned Bengali poet Subhash Mukhopadhyay proposed almost an instant solution to this problem. He said, to resolve this issue, it would suffice to erect a statue, for instance, of Prem Chand in Kolkata, and a statue of Rabindranath in, say, New Delhi. Whatever naive it might sound on the first listen, in fact, the poet imagined a cosmopolitan space where Tagore would speak Hindi and Prem Chand Bengali. So, erecting a statue of a non-indigenous writer amounts to a bridge building, which is a cosmopolitan competence par excellence. And here, translation can play a role in mediating between different traditions and cultures, emphasizing a multiplicity of perspectives, rather than upholding the world's unicity and homogenizing trends. Secondly, in the globalized world, the cosmopolitan competence, which is the driver of critical thinking, is also the key to social and economic progress. A homogenized world is dangerous, both politically and culturally. This doesn't make room for any difference, doesn't allow us to speak differently, to have different views. What Milan Kundera says about totalitarian regime is also true for a homogenized culture based on monolingualism. In an interview with Philip Roth, Kundera says, in any case, it seems to me that all over the world, people nowadays prefer to judge rather than to understand, to answer rather than to ask, so that the voice of the novel is the site of critical thinking, can hardly be heard over the noisy foolishness of human certainties, unquote. In the multiplicity of poles of this heterogeneous space, one element plays a very vital role. This is called the other. What is the other? Put simply, it is a person or a group of people who declare themselves to be different because they question some of the views of the self. The other or others, therefore, differ from the self. So, the other compels the self to face questions, that is, to think critically. Translation is a space where one culture interprets itself in light of the encounter with the other and constantly undergoes change as a result. This gives an experience that mobilizes our relationship to others as well as our conception of ourselves as an experience of the foreign. This helps us to look at ourselves from the point of view of the other and thus allows us to correct our own stances and postures and grow or move forward or progress faster. In fact, the dynamics of translation start from what is one's own, what is known and familiar, the same or the self, in order to move forward towards the foreign, the other, and to return again to the point of departure through this experience of the foreign. This is markedly different from a conception of translation as appropriation. It is not a simple reduction or annexation of the other to what is known and familiar. It is moving to and fro constantly between the foreign text and the domestic reader. We must therefore renounce the dream of a perfect translation as a homogeneous text. A perfect translation is actually not a translation. It may be called appropriation or domestication of foreign text, reduced to the norms and demands of the target language and culture. Therefore, in translation worthy of its name, we must not abolish both the memory of the foreign and the concern for the self. A translator can be compared to a passer, a boatman, whose function consists in transporting the author to the reader and the reader to the author. So, a translator shouldn't deny the foreign as foreign by rendering the foreign falsely familiar, by rendering translation transparent. Since domesticating translations deny openness to the other as other, they deny the experience of the foreign. So, in a good translation, we can always witness a struggle between ethnocentric demands for intelligibility and the irreducible strangeness of the other. Here, I would like to cite an example drawn from the popular Bengali culture. A very recent mainstream romantic Bengali comedy, Dal Bati Churma, recounts a love story between a Bengali girl and a Rajasthani boy, both based in Kolkata. Both the families seem to be opposed to their relationship and marriages due to linguistic and cultural differences. So their romance and marriage are taking place in the midst of interminable tensions and conflicts between two cultures. In spite of or because of conflicts, two cultures, without merging one into the other, continue to build emotional bridges between the boy and the girl. Another interesting point about this film is its communications are hybridized. That is, during emotional exchanges and heated quarrels, the Bengalis are speaking in a broken and hybridized Hindi, and the Rajasthanis are speaking in broken and mixed Bengali. Being cosmopolitan, the space of translation also stands out as space of hybridity. A hybrid text is a text that results from a translation process. It shows features that somehow seem out of place, strange, or unusual for the receiving culture, that is the target culture. These features, however, are not the result of a lack of translational competence, but they are evidence of conscious and deliberate decisions of the translator. Proceeding from an act of reading, translation exposes the source text to a range of possible treatments, rendering its meaning inherently mobile. Therefore, a translation is simultaneously itself, in a sense of being a text in its own right, and its own construction of its other. The inherent ambivalence of this doubled identity gives translation its transformative power. In a multicultural, multilingual society, translation is inevitable, and thereby the importance of hybrid texts is increased day by day. In commercial, political, economic negotiations, hybrid texts are the only mode of communications. Now, by twisting Marx's famous call, "Workers of the world unite," we can urge the inhabitants of the cosmopolis to converse. Democracy and social or economic progress demand equality. Equality in all respects, even with respect to communications, where advantages are not allowed for any linguistic group whatsoever to the disadvantage of all other groups. In fact, cosmopolitanism is the driver of progress, and this urges us to scale down the importance of the self in the form of the vernacular or the mother tongue, which is a language of identity, in support of a cosmopolitan language like, say, Esperanto, which is a language of communications devoid of all cultural underpinnings related to the identity. As Gustave Flaubert once wished to have in the 19th century France, a shared European language of international communications, and he suggested for that Latin, since Latin was then, as it is now, a dead language, no more in service of any European nationality whatsoever. The question has resurfaced in today's world at the peace congresses, in the various workers' internationals, in world social forums, also in the midst of various international bodies of the European Union, or in our own Indian cultural context. We can cite the literary meets organized and hosted under the aegis of Sahitya Academy. This hybrid space is very aptly captured, for example, by the spirit and the name of a poetry sessions of UNMESHA of this year, multilingual poetry readings, weaving a new world, or poetry sans borders. Therefore, an alternative cosmopolitan approach could be proposed, as some experts maintain from a normative standpoint that democratic politics must be in Esperanto. In the same vein, a shift from a language of identity to a language of communication could be promoted as a basic prerequisite for promoting democracy and social progress in multilingual and pluricultural societies. As Flaubert thought of Latin in the context of Europe, should we think of a lingua franca in the Indian context too? A language that belongs to none but could be used by everybody in intercultural communications in order to create a cosmopolitan hybrid space as a driver of progress and critical thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Triranjan Chakraborty. Now I invite Mr. Vaibhav Sharma, the youngest of us, to say his piece. Yeah.
Finally, huh? I would like to thank Sahitya Academy first of all for giving me this platform, and to our esteemed Adhyaksh ji, Mr. Kalyan Raman ji. I believe that no society can call itself progressive or progressed unless the voice of the margins of its margins is not put right front and center. There's a book I'm currently translating by Anil Yadav. It's called Nagar Vadhuein Akhbar Nahi Padhti. The English title is Courtesans Don't Read Newspapers. It's a story of the sex workers of Banaras who live in this small slum called Madwadi. It is second largest sex work slum in the country, but nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to write about it. And in that story, there is this journalist who is a photojournalist, but he's so influenced by the story and the struggle of these people who are trying to save their homes as they are being driven away by builders and municipality and the police, that he decides to go and see what is happening inside. And when he comes back with a story, the editor of his newspaper tells him, but you have 300 sex workers, और वो भी अखबार नहीं पढ़ती, even they don't read newspapers. Who are we publishing it for? What's the point? But, that way you can say that translation has and translation will bring out stories from parts of the country or parts of the state or the world, globally even, which are not heard in their own languages or which are not heard outside of their own languages. But I would also like to go to the other side and very quickly say that translation is something which people, it's discarded very easily. Very easily people tend to say that translation takes away from the original. Translation doesn't give us the feel of the original. Translation doesn't keep what we read in in my favorite original book, and then it got translated and everything went to hell. Well, it didn't, because that book, which was being read by the readers of that particular language, is now being read by the readers of other language who maybe did not have those experiences in their regions. And even after that, even after the quick discard of translation, so much onus has been put on the shoulders of translation to be the driver of progress. Like Dr. Prasad said, what is progress? And why should translation be its driver? I, for one, the new young flame, here I am, I, for one, would like to translate things which are not the great, which are not saying big things, which are not doing great, special, very, the marmik kahaniya. I would like to translate a chicklet, what publishers say chicklet, which is the stories of women and stories of people in their homes. I would like to translate sci-fi. I would like to translate books of magical realism. I'm currently working on Amit Datta's book, Karl J. Kambakt. It's a story of a 10-year-old who wakes up and realizes everything is magical around him. And the trees have random fruits growing from it. Crows enter a bus and attack people and snatch away diamond necklaces from people because crows are dacoits now. The monkeys know magic. The water is salty. The animals can listen to human beings and understand and then conspire against them. Those are the stories I would like to tell, because people tend to forget, who are not in translation, who are not translators, they tend to forget that in India, translators are also people who build a line of books. They are, as you will say, that they are curating a collection which is only and only for them and their readers. And I would like to curate a collection which goes beyond just the most important stories. I would like to also tell the stories which are on the margins and which are not heard similarly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vaibhav. We are just about, can you hear me? Yeah. We have reached the end of this session. Thankfully, only about a couple of minutes late. So we'll be able to vacate this place. What I want to say is that I was very, very gratified and happy that we heard such a diversity of views. At the same time, there is a commonality, there's a thread that's running through, the presentations of all of us, and which can only be, which is very special to translators, I think. But yes, we have all restated the same thing in different ways too. That the onus of critical thinking and progress cannot be placed on translators and translation, because translators can only make this possible, create the possibility, but the onus rests with you. People who read translations and act on them. That is, there was a rich diversity of views and facts presented here. and I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you.
Can I say something? This is not a criticism of Sahitya Academy, but a gentle statement of fact about all conferences, any session or translation, being televised, being recorded. There will be no sign interpreter. There will be no sign interpreter. Right? So this is something that we have to take care of. Right? And all future systems.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। शुक्रिया। अनुवाद के इस सत्र में हिस्सेदारी करने वाले आदरणीय एन कल्याण रमन जी, आलोक जी, प्रसाद जी, साहना विजय कुमार, प्रिनंजन चक्रवर्ती, वैभव शर्मा। के बाद अगला सत्र हमारा कविता केंद्रित है और हमारे तमाम प्रतिभागी बाहर हमारी प्रतीक्षा कर रहे हैं। आप सब आए और अनुवाद के इस बहुत ही ज़रूरी सत्र में ज़रूरी संवाद सुनने में आपने अपनी हिस्सेदारी दर्ज की, इसके लिए आप सबका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। अगले सत्र में भी आप सादर आमंत्रित हैं। धन्यवाद।